The crunch of a nacho cheese Dorito echoing in a sterile medical room is a highly underrated symphony. "Mr. Henderson," I mumbled, licking a speck of orange cheese dust from my thumb. I leaned back in my rolling stool, glaring at the middle-aged man shivering in my dental chair. "If you do not start flossing, I am going to legally adopt your gums, because clearly, you have abandoned them. It's a gingivitis festival in there." "Mr. Henderson," whimpered, I sighed, tapping the screen of my phone. It was 5:45 p.m. on a rainy Tuesday in Brooklyn. 15 minutes until closing time. 15 minutes until I could lock the doors of this rundown strip mall clinic, waddle back to my apartment, and violently devour the large pepperoni pizza I had already ordered. I am Oliver Hayes. 2 years ago, I was the valedictorian of Columbia University's College of Dental Medicine. My professors called me a prodigy. The elite Manhattan clinics offered me blank checks. I rejected them all. Why? Because the upper-crust medical world requires waking up at 6 a.m., pretending to care about a billionaire's cosmetic veneers, and functioning on kale smoothies. I prefer sleeping until 10 a.m., eating garbage, and living a glorious salted fish existence where the bar is comfortably low. "Rinse and spit," I ordered Mr. Henderson. He scrambled out of the chair like a man fleeing a burning building. Just as the door clicked shut behind him, a tiny shadow slipped into the room. I blinked. Standing by my sterilization tray was a kid, maybe 5 years old, wearing a miniature tailored Burberry trench coat that probably cost more than my dental chair. He had unruly dark hair, piercing hazel eyes, and he was aggressively pouring a packet of strawberry pop rocks directly into his mouth. "Hey kid," I drawled, not getting up. "This is a dental clinic, not a candy store. You're literally eating sugar explosions in front of a dentist. That's disrespectful." The kid crunched loudly, maintaining unblinking eye contact. "I'm hiding. If you tell the scary men outside where I am, I'll have them break your legs." I snorted, popping another Dorito into my mouth. "Joke's on you, gremlin. If they break my legs, I don't have to stand up to work tomorrow. Want a chip?" Before the kid could answer, the front door of my clinic didn't just open. It exploded inward. The heavy glass shattered, and the air pressure in my tiny waiting room plummeted. Instantly, my inner omega slammed against my ribcage in blind, primal panic. The scent rolled in before the man even stepped through the doorway. It was a suffocating, violent wave of black gunpowder and dry, aged bourbon oak. Prime Alpha, a predator at the absolute top of the food chain. The sheer density of his pheromones made the sweet, comforting scent of toasted marshmallows and brown sugar boba, my own natural scent, flare up in a desperate, defensive cloud. He stepped into the light. He was terrifyingly gorgeous, standing at least 6'3", wearing a bespoke charcoal three-piece suit that screamed old money and fresh blood. His jawline could cut glass, and his dark eyes swept the room with homicidal intent. Flanking him were 3 massive goons whose hands hovered ominously inside their jackets. Dominic Salvetter, the undisputed boss of the East Coast Italian Mafia. I recognized him from the late-night true crime blogs I read when I had insomnia. "Leo." Dominic's voice was a low, vibrating rumble that shook the floorboards. The kid behind me didn't flinch. "Hi, Uncle Dom." Dominic's deadly gaze snapped to me. I was still sitting on my stool, holding a half-eaten Dorito. He took a slow, menacing step forward. "You," he growled, the gunpowder scent spiking sharply. "If you touch one hair on his head, I will paint these walls with your blood." Suddenly, the most terrifying man in New York froze. The color completely drained from his perfectly sculpted face. He let out a strangled, breathless gasp, his hand flying to clutch the lower right side of his jaw. His knees buckled, and the great Dominic Salvetter crashed onto my cheap linoleum floor, groaning in absolute agony. His goons panicked, reaching for their weapons. "Boss, stand down, you idiots," I snapped, the annoyance completely overriding my omega instincts. I rolled my stool over to the fallen Mafia boss. "Put the guns away unless you plan to shoot a tooth. He's not dying. He's having an acute flare-up of an impacted wisdom tooth. It's hitting the mandibular nerve. Worst pain known to man." Dominic glared up at me, his eyes watering, though he'd rather die than admit it. "Fix it," he gasped out. I looked at the clock, 5:50 p.m. My pizza was going to get cold. "Fine," I groaned, grabbing him by the lapels of his obscenely expensive suit and practically dragging him into my dental chair. "But I'm charging you for the door." I didn't bother with the pleasantries. In my salted fish laziness lay a terrifying efficiency. I needed this man out of my clinic. Within 45 seconds, I had a heavy dose of local anesthesia and a mild intravenous sedative pumped into his system. Dominic's murderous glare instantly melted into a glassy, unfocused stare. "All right, big guy, open wide," I muttered, snapping on my gloves. I grabbed my elevators and forceps. With the precision of a seasoned sniper, I bypassed the bone, found the purchase point, and extracted the massive, infected molar in exactly 3 minutes flat. No drilling. Barely any blood. A masterpiece. I tossed the bloody tooth onto the metal tray with a satisfying clink. All done. Bite down on this gauze. I turned around to take off my gloves, only to feel a massive, heavy hand wrapped securely around my wrist. I looked down. Dominic was staring up at me, high as a kite on the sedatives, his dark eyes wide and full of absolute wonder. "You smell like marshmallows," the Mafia boss slurred, his terrifying aura replaced by the demeanor of a heavily drugged golden retriever. He pressed my hand against his cheek. "Are you an angel?" "I'm a dentist," I deadpanned, trying to yank my hand back. His grip was like a steel vise. "No," Dominic insisted, his voice dropping into a goofy, reverent whisper. "You're my wifey. You took the bad pain away, wifey. I love you." I stared at him in horror. "Okay, the drugs are definitely hitting the cortex. I'm gonna marry you," Dominic continued, patting my hand clumsily. "Do you like candy? I'll buy you the Haribo factory. The whole thing. Just for you, wifey." From the corner of the room, I heard a quiet beep. I snapped my head around. Little Leo was holding a ridiculously expensive smartphone. The camera lens pointed directly at us. "Are you recording this?" I demanded. Leo smirked in evil, brilliant glint in his eyes, full HD doc. "This is going straight to TikTok." I let out a long, exhausted sigh, finally wrenching my hand free from the drugged crime lord. I walked over to my front desk, furiously typing on my keyboard. "Get your boss out of my chair," I barked at the dumbfounded goons, the printer whirring to life. I ripped the paper out and slapped it against Dominic's chest as they hauled him up. "That's the bill." I tripled it because he touched me, and another 1,000 for the door. "If you don't pay by tomorrow, I'm sending him to collections." As they dragged a giggling, sedated Dominic Salvator out into the rain, I locked what was left of my front door. I just wanted my pizza. Little did I know, by extracting that tooth, I had just signed a lifetime contract with the underworld. Cardboard and duct tape are terrible insulators against the crisp morning air of a Brooklyn autumn. I sat at my front desk the next day, glaring at the makeshift patch job covering the gaping hole where my clinic's glass door used to be. I was sipping a dangerously cheap bodega coffee and carefully unwrapping a bacon, egg, and cheese sandwich. It was 9:00 am, which, in my salted fish vocabulary, is basically the crack of dawn. I was already in a foul mood. The street outside my window suddenly went eerily quiet. The usual symphony of honking cabs and yelling pedestrians died out, replaced by the low, synchronized purr of heavy engines. I took a bite of my sandwich and watched as 5 matte black, bulletproof Cadillac Escalades seamlessly blocked off the entire street. Men in tailor suits stepped out, forming a perimeter. It looked like the president was visiting, if the president ran an illegal gambling ring and broke kneecaps for a living. The rear door of the center SUV opened. Dominic Salvator stepped onto the pavement. There was no trace of the giggling, sedated golden retriever from yesterday. Today, he looked like the Grim Reaper in a custom Brioni suit. His dark eyes were cold, calculating, and fixed entirely on my cardboard door. Even from inside, I could feel the suffocating wave of his pheromones. The heavy scent of gunpowder and aged bourbon crashed against the building, a silent, aggressive warning meant to force any lesser Omega to their knees. My inner Omega definitely whimpered, instinctively wanting to bare its throat in submission. I aggressively shoved another bite of my sandwich into my mouth to shut it up. I didn't have time for biological subordination. I had a 9:30 am root canal appointment. Dominic didn't bother opening the door. He simply kicked the cardboard aside, stepping into my clinic like he owned the oxygen inside it. "Oliver Hayes," he said. His voice was a lethal, quiet rasp. It sent an involuntary shiver down my spine, which I immediately blamed on the draft. "Dominic Salvator," I replied, chewing slowly. "Did you bring my money? Because if you're here for a follow-up, you need to make an appointment. And I don't take Mafia insurance." He stalked toward my desk, placing both of his massive, leather-gloved hands on the counter. He leaned in, trapping me in his shadow. The sheer proximity of his prime alpha scent made my own toasted marshmallow pheromones spike defensively, filling the small space with a ridiculous, sugary contrast to his deadly aura. "You saw me vulnerable," Dominic stated, ignoring my sass. His eyes were completely unreadable. No one sees me like that and gets to walk away. You're a liability. I am a medical professional, I corrected, wiping a crumb off my cheek. Patient confidentiality is my middle name. Well, actually it's Thomas. But you get the point. Besides, I gave you a bill. $3,000 for the tooth, $1,000 for the door. I slid a piece of paper across the desk. And I've updated the invoice. I've added a $100,000 fee for emotional damages. Dominic froze. He looked at the paper, then back at me, his sharp jaw ticking. Emotional damages. Yes, I deadpanned. You grabbed my hand, called me wifey, and promised me the Haribo factory. As an unmarried, highly respectable Omega, my purity has been compromised. Pay up. Or little Leo's high-definition TikTok video of the East Coast Mafia boss crying like a baby gets forwarded to the FBI. And TMZ. For a long, terrifying second, Dominic didn't move. The air in the room grew so heavy it was hard to breathe. I wondered briefly if this was the moment I died over a bacon, egg, and cheese sandwich. Instead, Dominic let out a low, dark chuckle. It wasn't an amused sound, it was the sound of a predator realizing its prey was completely insane. You have absolutely zero survival instincts, do you, little marshmallow? Before I could process the nickname, Dominic reached across the desk. He didn't draw a weapon. He just grabbed me by the waist of my scrubs, hoisted me over the counter like a sack of potatoes, and threw me over his broad shoulder. Hey, I yelled, kicking my legs wildly. Put me down. You're compressing my diaphragm. And I dropped my sandwich. You don't need the sandwich, Dominic growled, striding out of the clinic as if carrying a screaming. Kicking dentist was a normal Tuesday activity. You're coming with me. If I can't trust you to keep your mouth shut, I'll just have to keep you where I can see you. This is kidnapping, I shrieked, pounding my fists against his solid back. It felt like punching a brick wall. I have rights. I have a root canal at 9:30. Cancel it, he ordered, tossing me unceremoniously into the back of the Escalade before sliding in next to me and slamming the door. The locks clicked instantly. You belong to the Salvetter family now. The drive to Long Island was a blur of tinted windows and my own furious, muffled cursing. Dominic ignored me completely, typing away on a secured tablet, though I caught him subtly inhaling my sweet scent more than once. An hour later, the gates of a sprawling, oceanfront fortress opened. The Salvetter estate was a masterpiece of modern architecture and terrifying security. I was dragged inside, marched past a dozen heavily armed guards, and thrown into a massive, sun-drenched suite that looked like it belonged in a five-star resort. You stay here, Dominic ordered from the doorway, his alpha tone leaving no room for argument. Don't try to run. The perimeter is guarded by Dobermans and men who shoot first. I will deal with you tonight. The heavy oak door slammed shut. The lock turned. I stood in the middle of the plush Persian rug fuming, kidnapped, held hostage by a mob boss. This was a disaster. I immediately began plotting my escape. I could tie the silk bedsheets together, climb down the balcony, and sneak past the dogs using. A soft knock interrupted my scheming. The door unlocked, and an older gentleman in a pristine white chef's coat wheeled in a silver serving cart. The smell hit me before he even spoke. Good afternoon, Mr. Hayes, the man said warmly. The boss thought you might be hungry. I am Chef Pierre, formerly of Le Bernardin. Today, I have prepared a pan-seared Wagyu beef slider with black truffle aioli, accompanied by lobster mac and cheese and a wild berry tartlet. I stopped calculating the drop from the balcony. I slowly approached the cart. The food was glowing. It was a culinary masterpiece. I picked up the Wagyu slider and took a cautious bite. The flavors exploded in my mouth. The meat melted like butter. Angels sang. I swallowed, staring at the chef with tears in my eyes. I walked over to the balcony, closed the French doors, and locked them from the inside. Escape. Run away from a private Michelin star chef just to go back to my drafty apartment and eat instant ramen. In this economy, absolutely not. Dominic Salvetter thought he was kidnapping a threat, but he had just willingly adopted a parasite. I sat down on the velvet sofa, kicked off my shoes, and dug into the lobster mac and cheese. Kidnap me harder, Mafia boss. I am never leaving this house. Day 4 of my tragic, harrowing captivity. I woke up at the ungodly hour of 11:15 a.m., stretched across a California king bed that cost more than my dental school tuition. I was wearing silk pajamas that someone had magically left in my closet, and I was deeply, profoundly considering ordering a second breakfast. Kidnapping, it turns out, is the best thing that has ever happened to my career. My peaceful, salted fish existence was violently interrupted when the double doors to my suite flew open. Dominic Salvator strode in, bringing his suffocating storm of gunpowder and aged bourbon with him. He was wearing a black turtleneck and an empty shoulder holster, looking like a terrifyingly handsome supervillain. He stared at me. I stared back, pulling the Egyptian cotton duvet up to my chin. "It is noon," Dominic said, his voice a dangerous low rumble. "Are you ever going to get out of that bed?" "I am a hostage," I reminded him, yawning. "I am currently suffering from Stockholm Syndrome. It requires a lot of bed rest. Where is Chef Pierre? I want pancakes." Dominic pinched the bridge of his nose, inhaling deeply. I noticed his shoulders physically relax as my toasted marshmallow scent hit him, though he'd rather eat glass than admit it. "Pierre is busy. And my nanny just quit because of the latest security threat. You are a medical professional. You are going to watch Leo today." "I'm a dentist, not a babysitter," I argued. "Kids are sticky." "He is your nephew now, technically." Dominic smirked, an evil glint in his dark eyes. "Since you're my wifey, watch him, or I burn your clinic to the ground." "You already broke the door," I yelled as he turned on his heel and walked out. 10 minutes later, I found myself in the sprawling, obscenely large formal dining room. Sitting at the end of a 20-foot mahogany table was little Leo. In front of him was a plate of seared scallops with a saffron risotto reduction. Leo was glaring at the scallops like they had insulted his ancestry. "I hate it," the 5-year-old declared, crossing his arms. "It's squishy." I pulled up a chair next to him, eyeing the Michelin star masterpiece. "Kid, you are disrespecting the mollusk, eat it." "No, I want dino nuggets." I stared at the heir to the Salvator Mafia empire. "You live in a $50 million mansion and you want processed chicken foam shaped like a stegosaurus." "Yes," Leo said stubbornly. "Uncle Dom never lets me have them. He says it's peasant food." I gasped, my culinary morality deeply offended. Peasant food. Junk food was the cornerstone of a happy, lazy life. I pulled out the sleek iPad Dominic had left me for approved reading and bypassed the security firewall with an embarrassingly easy bypass code I guessed on the first try. It was 0000. I logged into a premium food delivery app and linked it directly to the black Amex card Dominic had carelessly left on the kitchen island. "Kid," I grinned, my inner Omega purring with mischievous delight. "We are going to stage a culinary rebellion." 45 minutes later, the grand dining table was covered in grease-stained paper bags. We had ordered a mountain of Brooklyn Street tacos, extra spicy chili cheese dogs, and a bucket of seasoned curly fries. Leo's eyes were wide with pure, unadulterated joy as he shoved a chili dog into his mouth, getting cheese all over his expensive Burberry sweater. "Delicious," he mumbled, a smear of mustard on his nose. Suddenly, Leo wiped his hands on a napkin, pulled out his ridiculously expensive smartphone, and propped it up against a crystal water goblet. He hit record. "What are you doing?" I asked around a mouthful of a carnitas taco. "Making a TikTok," Leo whispered, his eyes gleaming with the exact same predatory intelligence as his uncle. "My followers love the hostage wifey arc. Yesterday's video of Uncle Dom staring at your bedroom door for 20 minutes got 2 million views." I choked on a piece of cilantro. "He did what?" Before Leo could elaborate, the heavy dining room doors opened. Dominic froze in the doorway. He looked at the grease stains on his priceless mahogany table. He looked at the mountain of fast food wrappers. He looked at Leo, covered in cheese, and then he looked at me, an Omega happily eating a messy taco in his pristine dining room. The gunpowder scent spiked, sharp and aggressive. "What in God's name is this?" "This," I said, holding up a curly fry, "is a balanced diet. Your kid was starving. Pierre's scallops are great, but sometimes a growing boy needs a little synthetic cheese." Dominic marched over, looking like he was about to flip the table. I instinctively braced myself, but instead of yelling, his dark eyes locked onto my face, specifically the corner of my mouth. He didn't pull his gun. He didn't order me back to my room. Dominic Salvator, the most feared man on the East Coast, reached out. His large, calloused thumb gently brushed the corner of my lips, wiping away a smear of salsa. The touch sent a violent, electric shock straight down my spine. My marshmallow scent spiked, sweet and completely flustered, mixing dangerously with his heavy oak pheromones. "You have a little," Dominic murmured, his voice dropping an octave, his thumb lingering on my lower lip for a fraction of a second too long. His eyes darkened, the lethal mafia boss momentarily replaced by an alpha completely mesmerized by his mate. "I know," I stuttered, my salted fish bravado completely evaporating. Dominic cleared his throat, abruptly pulling his hand back and adjusting his cuffs to regain his composure. He looked at the greasy spread, reluctantly. He picked up a leftover carnitas taco and took a bite. He chewed in silence, then, very quietly he muttered, "Not bad." From the corner of the table, Leo's phone silently recorded the entire thing, the video, later titled "Ruthless Mob Boss Defeated by Street Taco and Cute Dentist," would go viral in an hour. Dominic didn't realize it yet, but he wasn't just holding a hostage anymore. His cold, echoing mansion was finally feeling like a home. And worst of all, I was starting to realize I didn't mind being the reason why. There is a universally accepted rule in my life: do not mess with my food. You can kidnap me, you can threaten my life, you can force me to live in a mansion with a terrifying mafia boss, but you never get between me and a Michelin star meal. It was day 7 of my captivity. Dominic had to leave for a mandatory negotiation in the city, taking the bulk of his heavily armed security detail with him. Before he left, he practically ordered me to stay inside and do nothing. Considering doing nothing is my Olympic sport, I happily obliged. Chef Pierre had been simmering a wild mushroom and black truffle bisque for 4 hours. The aroma filling the mansion was intoxicating, earthy rich, and dripping with heavy cream. I was vibrating with excitement, standing in the massive marble kitchen wearing a ridiculous silk apron over my pajamas, holding a solid silver ladle like a scepter. "Just 2 more minutes, Mr. Hayes," Pierre smiled, turning his back to chop some fresh parsley. I leaned over the giant Le Creuset pot, inhaling deeply. My toasted marshmallow scent was practically humming with culinary anticipation. Then, the kitchen doors exploded. Not figuratively, literally. A deafening crash shattered the tranquility as the heavy oak service doors were violently kicked off their hinges. 3 massive men dressed in tactical black gear, wearing ski masks and carrying suppressed submachine guns, stormed into the kitchen. Russian Bratva, Dominic's rivals. They had figured out the estate's security was light and came looking for the rumored weak Omega the Don was hiding. But I didn't care about the guns. I didn't care about the ski masks. I cared about the fact that when the door flew off its hinges, it smashed directly into the kitchen island. The impact jolted the stove. The priceless, 4-hour simmered pot of truffle bisque tipped over, crashing to the marble floor in a tragic, catastrophic tidal wave of ruined cream and wasted mushrooms. Time stopped. Chef Pierre shrieked, diving behind the refrigerator. The 3 assassins fanned out, their weapons raised, their aggressive, putrid alpha pheromones flooding the room. They looked at me, expecting me to cower or cry, or beg for my life. I stared at the puddle of ruined soup. Something inside me, a dark, lazy, deeply food-obsessed part of my soul, snapped. My sweet marshmallow scent didn't curdle in fear, it caramelized into burnt, toxic sugar. "You," I whispered, my voice trembling with a rage I hadn't felt since dental school finals. "Do you have any idea how much black truffles cost?" The lead assassin sneered, stepping over the soup and raising his gun. "Grab the Omega. If he screams, shoot him." I didn't scream. I reached into the deep pocket of my silk apron. When Dominic kidnapped me, he had his men bring my personal bag from the clinic. Because I am inherently lazy, I hadn't bothered to unpack my emergency dental kit. My hand wrapped around cold steel and glass carpules. "You ruined my lunch," I hissed. Before the lead Russian could blink, I lunged. I might be a salted fish, but I was also a prodigy who understood human anatomy better than most trauma surgeons. You know what is infinitely scarier than a bullet? A 27-gauge long dental needle attached to a stainless steel aspirating syringe. I didn't punch him. I slammed my hand into the side of his neck, driving the needle straight into his carotid triangle, right over the vagus nerve. My thumb depressed the plunger, instantly flooding his system with a maximum dose of articaine mixed with epinephrine. The assassin's eyes rolled into the back of his head. His nervous system short-circuited under the massive localized anesthetic shock, and he dropped to the floor like a sack of concrete, instantly paralyzed and unconscious. "What the?" The second guy raised his weapon, panic flashing in his eyes. I didn't give him a second. I grabbed the heavy silver ladle from the counter and hurled it with terrifying precision, nailing him right between the eyes. As he stumbled backward, I closed the distance, whipping out a second preloaded syringe. Left submandibular space. Direct injection to the facial nerve block. He hit the ground, foaming slightly at the mouth, his face completely frozen in a lopsided, drooling mask of terror. The third assassin stared at his fallen comrades, then at the enraged Omega standing in pajamas, holding a terrifying metal syringe dripping with anesthetic. The Russian made a very smart tactical decision. He dropped his gun and sprinted for the shattered door. "You don't get to run from the soup," I yelled, throwing a heavy marble rolling pin. It caught him in the back of the knees, sending him crashing face first into the hallway wall. He went out cold. Silence descended on the kitchen, save for the tragic drip of the truffle bisque leaking off the counter. Exactly 3 minutes later, the screeching of tires echoed outside. The front doors were blown open, and Dominic Salvator tore into the house like a hurricane of absolute violence. His suit was unbuttoned, his gun drawn, and his pheromones were a chaotic blizzard of pure, panicked alpha desperation. "Oliver," Dominic roared, crashing into the kitchen, expecting to find my blood. Instead, he froze. The 3 massive Russian hitmen were piled on the floor. One was drooling uncontrollably, the other was completely catatonic, and the third had a rolling pin resting on his back. And then there was me. I was on my knees in the middle of the kitchen, holding the empty Le Creuset pot, tears streaming down my face. Dominic dropped his weapon, his heart clearly stopping in his chest. He rushed over it, sliding onto his knees right into the puddle of soup, not caring about his bespoke suit. He pulled me violently against his chest, his large hands frantically checking me for bullet holes. "Little bird, I've got you," Dominic rasped, his voice breaking with a vulnerability that would terrify his enemies. "Are you hurt? Did they touch you?" I sobbed, burying my face into his chest, clutching his expensive shirt. "It's gone, Dom. I know, baby, it's okay. You're safe now," he soothed, kissing the top of my head, his heavy oak scent wrapping around me like a protective blanket. "I'll kill whoever sent them." "What did they do?" I pulled back, sniffing loudly, and pointed a tragic, accusatory finger at the puddle on the floor. "They murdered my truffle bisque. It simmered for 4 hours, Dominic." 4 hours? Dominic stopped. He looked at my tear-stained face. He looked at the medical-grade syringes sticking out of the unconscious assassins. Then, he looked at the soup. A complex array of emotions crossed the Mafia boss's face: profound confusion, sheer disbelief, and finally absolute, undeniable awe. The terrifying alpha who ruled the East Coast with an iron fist realized, at that exact moment, that his hostage was a lethally precise medical assassin who only cried over spilled soup. Dominic let out a low, breathless laugh, pulling me back against his chest. "I'll buy you 100 truffles, wifey," he whispered against my hair, the bond between us suddenly humming with a terrifyingly heavy dose of affection. "I'll buy you the whole damn restaurant." The Russian bratva did not appreciate my dental intervention, apparently, turning 3 of their top hitmen into drooling, temporarily paralyzed lawn ornaments, and giving one of them a concussion with a rolling pin had put a rather substantial bounty on my head. They dubbed me the Needle. It was incredibly dramatic. Because of this, Dominic enacted a new, tyrannical rule, the 24/7 protocol, where the dawn when I went. "I am a creature of leisure," I complained, dragging my feet across the polished marble floor of the estate foyer. It was 8:00 p.m. on a Friday. I was wearing an oversized Yale hoodie, sweatpants, and holding a family-sized bag of Haribo gummy bears. "I don't want to go to a sit-down in Queens. Queens is far. And it's raining." Dominic stood by the front door, looking devastatingly lethal in a sharp black suit and a cashmere overcoat. He adjusted his cufflinks, his dark eyes sweeping over my atrocious outfit. "The Russians know you're here, Ollie. Until I dismantle Ivan's operation, you are not leaving my sight," Dominic said firmly. He stepped closer, reaching out to lazily loop a finger through the drawstring of my hoodie, pulling me a fraction of an inch closer. His heavy, intoxicating scent of gunpowder and bourbon oak enveloped me, making my toes curl slightly in my sneakers. "Besides, you're my consigliere now." "I am your hostage," I corrected, popping a red gummy bear into my mouth. "Hostages don't get unlimited access to my black Amex to order artisan cupcakes from Paris." He smirked, gently tapping my nose. "Let's go, little bird. I'll buy you a milkshake on the way back." Bribery. It works every time. An hour later, I found myself sitting at a scarred wooden table in the back room of a dimly lit, heavily guarded meatpacking warehouse. The air was thick with cheap cigar smoke and the aggressive, posturing pheromones of 5 rival capos who had come to negotiate territory. There were guns on the table. There were tattooed men glaring at each other. The tension was thick enough to slice with a meat cleaver. And then there was me. I was slumped in a leather chair directly to Dominic's right, loudly crunching on an apple I had found in the SUV, scrolling through TikTok on my phone. A burly capo with a scar over his eye slammed his fist on the table. "We demand the Doc Salvator. You think you can just SHH I hissed without looking up from my screen. I'm watching a video about how to make a 3-cheese grilled sandwich. Your yelling is ruining the acoustic vibes. The entire room went dead silent. The capo's face turned an alarming shade of purple. He looked at Dominic, absolutely bewildered. Dumb. Who the hell is this kid? Why is an Omega in pajamas sitting at a capo summit? Dominic leaned back in his chair, a cold, arrogant smile playing on his lips. He casually rested his heavy arm across the back of my chair, a blatant, territorial claim that sent a rush of heat straight to my cheeks. This kid, Dominic said, his voice dropping into a deadly whisper, is the one who took out 3 of Ivan's best men in under 3 minutes with a soup ladle and a syringe. If you raise your voice at him again, I will let him practice his root canal technique on you without anesthesia. Continue. The capo swallowed hard, looking at me with newfound, absolute terror. I just smiled, held up a yellow gummy bear, and popped it into my mouth. The rest of the meeting went surprisingly smoothly. Nobody wanted to argue with the guy whose wifey was a rumored medical assassin. Despite my constant complaining about being dragged into the criminal underworld, I couldn't ignore the toll it was taking on Dominic. Later that night, on the drive back to Long Island, the adrenaline of the meeting faded. The privacy partition in the Maybach was up. Dominic was sitting next to me, his eyes closed, his head resting against the cool glass of the window. He was rubbing his right shoulder, a grimace of quiet pain tight on his face. I stopped chewing my gummies. I looked at him. Really looked at him. Beneath the terrifying Mafia boss exterior, he was exhausted. The burden of protecting his empire, his nephew, and now a lazy, loudmouthed dentist was heavy. Take off your jacket, I said quietly. Dominic opened one eye, looking at me in confusion. What? The suit jacket, take it off. And unbutton the shirt, I ordered, shifting closer on the plush leather seat. Your trapezius muscle is a rock. You're favoring your right side because of an old injury, probably a bullet wound, which is causing a massive knot in your rhomboid major. It's compressing a nerve, which is why you have a headache. Dominic stared at me, genuinely stunned. Slowly he complied, shrugging off the expensive coat and unbuttoning his shirt to reveal a torso carved from marble, marred by a scattering of faded scars. Sure enough, there was a puckered bullet scar near his right clavicle. I shuffled closer, straddling the space between us. I placed my hands on his bare, hot skin. I'm a doctor, sort of, I muttered, trying to ignore how fast my heart was beating. I used my thumbs to find the exact pressure point along his spine, applying deep, clinical pressure. Dominic let out a low, rough groan that sent a shockwave straight to my core. His head fell back against the seat. God, Ollie. Shut up and let me work, Mafia boss, I whispered, my voice betraying a slight tremble. As I worked the knot out of his muscle, the atmosphere in the car shifted. My sweet toasted marshmallow scent, usually defensive, began to seep out in soft, soothing waves. Dominic's heavy bourbon oak pheromones wrapped around mine, not to dominate, but to pull them close. They tangled together in the confined space of the car, creating a rich, intoxicating blend that made my head spin. He reached up, his large hand gently covering mine where it rested on his shoulder. He didn't say a word, but the profound, overwhelming gratitude in his touch was louder than a gunshot. I was a salted fish. I avoided work. I avoided stress. But sitting there, in the back of a bulletproof car with the most dangerous man in New York, I realized a terrifying truth. I was falling in love with my kidnapper, and my heat was rapidly approaching. There is a reason I chose dentistry over emergency medicine. I hate running, I hate blood, and I absolutely loathe being outside in the rain. It was midnight at a shipping pier in Lower Manhattan. The air was freezing, thick with the smell of salt and diesel. I was sitting safely in the back of the bulletproof Maybach, wearing a highly coveted, vintage 1994 Nirvana t-shirt that I had bought off eBay for an embarrassing amount of money. I was halfway through a bag of limited edition white cheddar popcorn, perfectly content to let Dominic handle his family business outside. He was supposed to be doing a simple weapon exchange. It was supposed to take 10 minutes. But Ivan's bratva didn't play by the rules. The first explosion shook the Maybach so violently I dropped my popcorn. Gunfire erupted, lighting up the rainy night like strobe lights in a deadly nightclub. I pressed my face against the tinted glass, my heart hammering against my ribs. Through the pouring rain, I saw Dominic. He was pinned behind a stack of wooden crates, his men returning fire. But something was wrong. Even through the sealed doors of the SUV, the scent hit me. Dominic's pheromones, usually a perfectly controlled blend of aged bourbon and gunpowder, suddenly turned feral. It was a suffocating, violent wave of pure, unadulterated alpha rage. It meant one thing: he was severely injured, and his primal instincts had completely overridden his rational brain. I watched in horror as a Russian hitman flanked his position. Dominic didn't shoot, he lunged. The Mafia boss tore into the man with his bare hands, his eyes glowing with a terrifying, mindless fury. He had taken a bullet to the side, his white shirt soaked in blood, but the pain had only triggered a berserker state. His own men were backing away terrified. A feral prime alpha is a force of nature. He couldn't distinguish friend from foe anymore. I am going to kill him for making me do cardio, I grumbled, my hands shaking as I grabbed my trusty dental kit. I kicked the Maybach door open and sprinted into the freezing rain. "Boss, don't!" Sullivan, Dominic's head of security, yelled over the gunfire. "He's feral. He'll tear you apart." "I'm his dentist, Sullivan. I've seen him cry over a molar," I shouted back, dodging a stray bullet and slipping on a puddle. I skidded to a halt just feet away from Dominic. He was standing over an unconscious Russian, his chest heaving, blood mixing with the rain on his skin. He heard my footsteps and whipped around. His dark eyes were completely gone, replaced by the pitch-black void of a feral predator. He let out a low, bone-chilling growl, his muscles tensing to strike. But as he lunged toward me, the sheer, crushing density of his feral alpha pheromones slammed into my biology like a freight train. My inner Omega didn't just whimper, it surrendered entirely. The heat, which wasn't supposed to arrive for another 2 days, hit me instantaneously. It felt like swallowing a lit match. A heavy, intoxicating cloud of toasted marshmallows and caramelized sugar exploded from my scent glands, desperately wrapping around Dominic's violent aura. My knees buckled. I fell against a cold metal shipping container, gasping for air as the fever took over my brain. Dominic froze mid-lunge. My scent crashed into his feral state, short-circuiting his aggression. The monster in his eyes blinked, warring with the sudden, overwhelming realization that his mate was in distress. He closed the distance in a millisecond, slamming his hands against the container on either side of my head, trapping me. He was panting, his fangs fully descended, his face inches from mine. "Mine," he rasps, a sound that was more animal than human. "Dominic Salvator," I gasped, fighting through the agonizing haze of my sudden heat. I looked down at my chest. He was bleeding profusely from a graze on his ribs, and the blood was smearing all over my clothes. My salted fish rage flared hotter than my biology. I raised my hand and slapped the most dangerous man in New York right across the face. Smack. "Wake up, you idiot," I yelled over the rain. "You are bleeding on my vintage Nirvana shirt. It's dry clean only." Dominic blinked, the slap and my ridiculous yelling finally snapping the last of the feral haze. His dark eyes widened as he looked at me, taking in my flushed skin, my dilated pupils, and the overwhelming scent of my heat flooding the war zone. "Ali," he breathed, panic replacing the rage, "your heat. It's too early." "No kidding, Doc," I groaned, my legs giving out. Dominic caught me effortlessly, hauling me flush against his solid, burning chest. Gunfire was still echoing around the docks. The Russians were regrouping. My heat scent was a beacon. It would drive every alpha within a mile completely insane. "I need to mask your scent," Dominic said, his voice urgent, his hand gripping the back of my neck. "I have to claim you. Just a temporary mark, to flood your system with my pheromones so they can't smell you. It's going to hurt." I didn't have the strength to argue. My body was burning from the inside out, screaming for him. I tilted my head to the side, exposing my pulsing scent gland to the freezing rain. Dominic didn't hesitate. He buried his face in my neck, inhaling deeply, and sank his teeth into my flesh. The pain was a sharp, brilliant shock, instantly swallowed by a blinding flash of euphoria. His bourbon and oak pheromones injected directly into my bloodstream, wrapping around my marshmallow scent like an unbreakable fortress. The bond snapped into place, heavy, possessive, and wildly intoxicating. I threw my arms around his broad shoulders, my fingernails digging into his soaked shirt. Even in the haze of absolute biological bliss, my mouth refused to shut. "Dumb," I hissed through my teeth, panting heavily against his ear as his fangs rested in my neck. "If you bite too hard and ruin my scent gland, I swear to God." He paused, his hot breath washing over my marked skin. "I will extract all 32 of your teeth without anesthesia," I threatened, my voice trembling with heat and snark. "You will be drinking pureed steak through a straw for the rest of your miserable Mafia life." A deep, rumbling vibration started in Dominic's chest, even in the middle of a deadly shootout. With blood on his shirt and a newly claimed Omega melting in his arms, the Mafia boss threw his head back and laughed. "I hear you, wifey," he murmured, kissing the bloody mark he had just made. He scooped me up into his arms effortlessly, completely ignoring the chaos around us. With his free hand, he drew his weapon, his eyes completely clear and lethally focused. "Sullivan," Dominic roared, his voice carrying the absolute, unbroken authority of a prime alpha who had just claimed his mate. "Kill them all. We are going home." Surviving a feral alpha, an impromptu heat, and a mafia shootout is exhausting. I spent the next 4 days basically comatose in the center of Dominic's California king bed, wrapped in his scent and refusing to move for anything less than Chef Pierre's imported truffles. By the time the fever of my heat finally broke, the Russian Bratva had been entirely dismantled. Dominic had handled his business with ruthless, sweeping efficiency. The East Coast underworld was quite terrified and acutely aware that Dominic Salvator had a mate who apparently weaponized dental anesthetics. Life returned to normal, or at least, my new billionaire hostage version of normal. A month after the Pierre incident, Dominic told me to get dressed. He had rented out the entirety of El Ocean, the most exclusive, impossible to book seafood restaurant in Manhattan, just for the two of us. I complained about having to put on hard pants, but the promise of premium crustacean silenced my protests. The restaurant was empty save for the waitstaff, who hovered around us with terrified reverence. Dominic looked devastating in a midnight blue tuxedo, his heavy scent of bourbon oak perfectly calm and deeply affectionate, intertwining effortlessly with my toasted marshmallow pheromones. "You haven't yelled at anyone in 3 days," Dominic noted, swirling a glass of vintage red wine. His dark eyes locked onto me with an intensity that still made my breath catch. "Are you feeling all right, wifey?" "I am conserving energy," I replied, adjusting the collar of my ridiculously expensive silk shirt. "It takes a lot of calories to process my genius." "Speaking of calories, where is the main course?" As if on cue, the double doors of the kitchen swung open. The head chef himself marched out, flanked by 2 waiters carrying a silver platter the size of a coffee table. They set it down between us. It was a masterpiece, a massive, 5-pound Alaskan king lobster, split perfectly down the middle, dripping in hot, golden garlic butter and garnished with fresh herbs. My inner Omega practically wept with joy. "Dominic," I breathed, staring at the lobster like it was a religious artifact. "I forgive you for the kidnapping." Dominic chuckled a low, rich sound. "Eat, little bird." I didn't need to be told twice. I grabbed the silver crackers and dug in, abandoning all pretense of high society manners. I was pulling a massive chunk of sweet, buttery claw meat out of the shell when my fork hit something solid. Clink. I frowned. Did this lobster swallow a rock? I used my fork to fish out the obstruction, wiping away a thick layer of garlic butter. It wasn't a rock. It was a ring. But calling it a ring felt like an insult to the sheer, astronomical weight of the thing. It was a flawless, 10-carat emerald-cut diamond set in platinum, surrounded by a halo of smaller, blindingly clear stones. It was the kind of ring that came with its own security detail. I froze, a piece of lobster meat dangling from my mouth. Dominic stood up. The ruthless, terrifying Don of the East Coast Mafia walked around the table and gracefully dropped down onto one knee. "Oliver," Dominic said, his voice dropping into smooth, devastatingly earnest rumble. "You are the laziest, most stubborn, loudmouthed creature I have ever met. You complain about walking upstairs, and you cry over soup. Is this a proposal or an assassination of my character?" I mumbled around the lobster meat, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. Dominic smiled, reaching out to gently take my butter-slicked left hand. "But you also brought light into a house that was entirely dark. You gave Leo a family, and you gave me a reason to come home. I don't want you as a hostage anymore. I want you as my consigliere, my mate, my husband. Marry me, Ollie." I stared at the multi-million-dollar diamond dripping in garlic butter. Then, I looked into Dominic's dark, golden-flecked eyes, feeling the heavy, undeniable thrum of our bond. "I have 3 conditions," I said, lifting my chin, the salted fish negotiator taking over. Dominic's eyes gleamed with amusement. "Name them." 1. Unlimited food budget. If I want Wagyu beef at 3 a.m., Pierre cooks it. 2. Under no circumstances am I to be woken up before 10 a.m., even if the FBI is raiding the house. 3. You. I pointed a greasy finger at his chest. Will submit to a full dental cleaning and scaling every 6 months. No whining. No sedatives. Dominic didn't even hesitate. Done. He slipped the massive diamond onto my ring finger. It fit perfectly, completely eclipsing my knuckle. "Good," I sighed, pulling him up by the lapels of his tuxedo and kissing him, tasting expensive wine and garlic butter. "Now peel the rest of this lobster for me. My hands are tired." 6 months later, the Salvator estate was buzzing with activity. I was lying on the massive velvet sofa in the grand living room, wearing a fluffy bathrobe and the 10-carat diamond ring, chewing on a piece of dried mango. Standing in front of me was Vinny the Butcher Russo, a 250-pound enforcer covered in gang tattoos. He was holding a tiny piece of mint-flavored dental floss, looking absolutely terrified. "No, Vinny, you're doing it wrong," I groaned, pointing my mango slice at him. "You're sawing at the gums. That's why you're bleeding. You have to make a C shape. Hug the tooth, Vinny. Hug the tooth. Like this, Mr. Ollie," Vinny squeaked, awkwardly wrapping the floss around his massive incisor. "Better," I sighed. "If you get gingivitis, I'm demoting you to guard duty in Alaska." From the corner of the room, a familiar beep echoed. Little Leo was sitting cross-legged on an armchair, holding his phone up. "What's the caption today, kid?" I asked, not bothering to sit up. "Day 182 of the Mafia's secret dentist." Leo grinned, tapping his screen. "The internet loves Vinny. They think his oral hygiene journey is very inspiring. Just make sure you get my good side," I yawned. The heavy oak doors to the living room opened, and Dominic walked in. He had just returned from a summit with the Chicago Syndicate. He looked exhausted, shedding his tailored suit jacket and loosening his tie. But the moment his eyes found me lounging on the sofa, the tension melted from his shoulders. His heavy, comforting scent of bourbon oak washed over the room. He walked over, completely ignoring the terrifying, heavily armed enforcer clumsily flossing in the center of the room. Dominic leaned over the back of the sofa, pressing a deep, lingering kiss to my marked neck, making my marshmallow scent spike with happy contentment. "Rough day, boss?" I asked, leaning my head back against his chest. "It is now that I'm home," Dominic murmured. He reached over the coffee table, picked up a perfectly peeled, chilled shrimp from a crystal bowl, and gently fed it to me. I chewed happily, looking around the room. I had a Michelin star chef on standby, a billionaire alpha who hand-fed me seafood, a TikTok-famous nephew, and an army of mobsters with impeccable dental hygiene. They say the Mafia life is dangerous, stressful, and chaotic. But as a professional salted fish, I have to admit, I had definitely found the perfect ocean.